Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back. Again, my name is Dr. Benjamin Walter. I'm the section head of movement disorders here at the Cleveland Clinic. And I would like to introduce our topic, which is using technology to take control of Parkinson's disease. We've got a lot of exciting things to talk about, what's coming up in the future. And I want to introduce our guest panel. So we have Dr. Jay Alberts. He's the Edward and F. Barbara Bell Family Endowed Chair and Vice Chair of Health Enabling Technology and Innovation in the Neurological Institute at the Cleveland Clinic. We have Dr. Dustin Heldman. He's the President of Great Lakes Neurotechnology. And we also have Dr. Richard Ramo. He's our Senior Functional Neurosurgery Fellow at the Cleveland Clinic, and he will be able to answer questions about deep brain stimulation and focus ultrasound and a lot of where that's going in the future. So we'll have a lot of exciting information for you. So first and foremost, why should I be interested in technology for my Parkinson's? I think that's an important question to ask to get into this topic. Technology changes at a very rapid pace. Technology is rapidly and dramatically also transforming many industries, not just healthcare, but really across the board. It creates rapid change. It also is making things less expensive and more accessible. And so as a person with Parkinson's or somebody who loves somebody who does have Parkinson's, this is obviously all things that we really want for our future. Major areas of tech innovation in Parkinson's disease include, but not exclusive to, care delivery. Particularly telemedicine is very big right now for obvious reasons. Surgical procedures and medical devices are great beneficiaries of technological advancement. Wearables, devices that you can wear essentially on your body that pick up data that allow us to function better in life. Data is a big part of technology, and it's something that's very lightweight. So we call it an asset-light resource. There's really not much needed to house data, but it has a huge impact on business and innovation. And then artificial intelligence, how we use that data to create predictions. So with the first topic with regards to healthcare delivery, I'll just highlight some big overview so we can get into a discussion with you about this. So start thinking about the questions that you have and start pasting them in the chat, because our experts will be able to answer your questions directly. So telemedicine is really big right now, and many of you have had this experience where you're interacting with your healthcare provider in your own living room. Of course, we're all having a virtual conference now with maybe 2,000 people here today in discussion, which is really tremendous. But this is transforming healthcare too. And if you look on the right hand of the slide, you can see that before COVID, we were a little bit ahead of the curve. We had about 10% of our practice treating people with Parkinson's disease through telemedicine, which is more than most places, but still a small number. In the quarantine phase of COVID, we went to 90% telemedicine and maybe 10% in person for those who really needed it. And now we're somewhere in between with maybe 30% that is telemedicine and the remainder being in person. So this is a big change, and I think many of us would predict this is here to stay. It's not a temporary change, and if you look at what the impact has been on our environment and economy, this is a graph of Zoom stock skyrocketing over the last year in the same time frame. So certain companies have really built up because of this change in COVID. That COVID has really, accelerated a transformation, something that was probably going to happen anyhow, but a lot faster. Medical devices. We talked a little bit about deep brain stimulation. Things are changing now and in the future with deep brain stimulation. For one, we have technology called sensing in some of our devices where we can actually pick up brainwave activity and use this to understand how our patients are doing in any moment in time. We're able to use this to make planning changes in their settings down the road, so we know if what we did worked well. But in the future, this will change to responsive stimulation potentially, where we can use that information to directly and dynamically change stimulation parameters. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see another technology that's already being used in a lot of our devices, which is current steering and directionality. And so these devices have leads with a different configuration of contacts on the wires. And you can see here that red blob that's moving around is all the possibilities. We're able to turn the stimulation up and down and move it up and down the lead, but we're also able with these particular leads to steer it left, right, front, back within a patient's brain to really fine tune where that stimulation is into the right area that the patient needs. This allows us to improve benefit and reduce side effects with stimulation. And so that's available now, but something that's continuing to improve. If you caught Dr. Machado's talk, and if not, please, you'll have the opportunity to listen to it anytime in the next year through this platform. He talked also about focus ultrasound, which is a big hot topic. Focus ultrasound is a technology to use ultrasound, focus into one spot in the brain, and be able to create a permanent change in that part of the brain that can stop tremor or at least reduce it significantly with that therapy. And it's a non-surgical approach, which is a nice aspect of it. It still is an invasive procedure. It is doing work on the brain. But I want to also highlight this is just the beginning of this technology as well. And there's a paper over here on the right talking about focused ultrasound and opening the blood-brain barrier for treatment of Parkinson's disease. So what we expect in the future with this is that you can actually use focused ultrasound in a different way, target a particular area of the brain to open some of the barriers that are normally there between blood vessels and the brain that prevent any medicine that you put in your bloodstream from getting into the brain. We can open it up in just one little spot, allow that medication to get to one particular targeted area of the brain. And where this is important is when we have therapies that are restorative, like gene therapy and other molecular therapy that's targeted to restore a particular part of the brain. We could potentially do this in a very specific way with focused ultrasound. That's something we don't have yet, but there's a lot of research going on this. So all these technologies lead to new possibilities. Wearables, you're going to hear a lot about today. We're familiar with the Apple Watch. It's a fitness tracker. You can use it as a medication reminder. It'll detect falls now. There's lots of other watches from other companies like this. But what you may not know is you can also potentially monitor tremor when your medications aren't working very well, or you can monitor dyskinesia when your medications are too strong. And then potentially somewhere in between where we can use this information, maybe even to link to something like deep brain stimulation and control the stimulator from data that's coming from a watch. And you'll hear some of that from some of our experts on our panel. And just the last thing I just want to highlight so that's open for discussion, again, with data and artificial intelligence, as we get big, organized, well-tended masses of data, we can create predictions with this information. And this is also rapidly transforming many industries across the world, really. If you think about some of the big data and AI-driven companies, Tesla, Uber, a company, it's basically a cab company with no cabs. Facebook, Amazon is a store without any stores. Netflix is a movie theater without actual theaters. So these are things that are really changing, and you'll see as it applies to medicine, the same will be true. So next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jay Alberts, who will share a little bit of his background and what he's doing with technology. And then we'll move on from there to Dr. Hellman, and we'll have an open discussion. So again, get your questions ready. Jay?
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Ben. And hopefully everyone can now see my screen. So Ben, I think you did a great job there in terms of talking about, technology, things that are coming. And, our approach to technology is really thinking of using technology in service of health. Right. So you can develop technology, right? There's the Bluetooth toaster, right? The Bluetooth toaster is fantastic to change your how much or how dark or light you want your toast, but you still have to put the toast in the toaster. So there is a question of the value of that type of technology. Our approach is really trying to use technology to advance Parkinson's treatment and identification of symptoms and really in service of health. So, we're using a lot of things that, in the past, you would have had to come to a biomechanics laboratory and maybe would have had you dressed in one of these little Speedos to get full body mechanics of your movement or your walking. But now what we've developed, again, using things that are either in your pocket with your own iPhone or with the AR kit within Apple device, we can actually get all of this biomechanical data that normally would have taken hours to set up and to collect and process. We can now get this very rapidly, and we get very precise information about someone's walking, their speed of walking, the distance, and things like that. So again, how do we use that? Well, we know that, in Parkinson's, obviously, some patients have problems with postural stability and gait. And so this is one way that we could be monitoring these things either in the clinic or even at home to get this information back to the provider to maybe make a change to your medication or to deep brain stimulation parameters. So that's something that we're doing. Again, we're really leveraging things with consumer devices. We're not building so much new devices because companies like Apple and Google and Microsoft and others, that's really their forte. We're just trying to build, at least the clinic, trying to build software applications that can leverage the scale that they provide us. So another example is here. So this is again, this is the expensive biomechanical version. So what we have here is we have two our Parkinson's patients walking under a single task. So that's where we're just having you march and in place. And the other side, we have them doing a dual task. But what's delivering that dual task? So that's like, walking and the same, or doing some other activity, which is, by the way, that's how we do most of our daily activities, right? Whether you're walking across the street with a cup of coffee, what you're doing is when you're crossing that street, you obviously are doing a motor task, but you also have to process cognitive information. Is a car coming? Do I have to avoid this pothole? And so trying to replicate those types of situations will really be beneficial in terms of the treatment of Parkinson's. Just from a personal perspective, a friend had deep brain stimulation, and he said, DBS has been great for my golf game, but I can't do my job. And his job was a computer programmer. So what do you do when you're a computer programmer? You're thinking of code, right? That's cognitive task. And then you're simultaneously trying to type that code. So you're doing two things at once. And so it would be very helpful for the clinician and the patient if we could quantify both, their performance while someone is doing those two things at once. And so this is an example of what I just showed there, how we could deliver another scene to the patient using the HoloLens device, which is here. So again, this is a device from Microsoft. And what we have is these different scenes are delivered to the patient. Now, what's really, to me as an engineer, what's really cool is that we have an ability to use the accelerometer and the gyroscope within the device to give us a measure of how far they're moving, or a real objective assessment of someone's function or what they're doing. So that goes all the way down to hand function. So we're developing now, and Dr. Walter mentioned about virtual visits. So we envision a time where some of the virtual visits could be enhanced because right now Dr. Walter can't do a true physical exam. So we're trying to build an electronic or digital physical exam where you could be looking at your hands with the HoloLens doing some of these movements or some of these other movements, and would give you very objective quantitative measures of that function. And so that's great. But I think the other part that we're really looking at and trying to get to the next level is to understand and to push how are people performing as they're doing activities of daily living, such as a grocery store, right? Everybody, well, used to say everybody goes to the grocery store, but now, maybe that's changing with COVID and people are getting things delivered. But nevertheless, this is a very common representative task. And so we're building a task where we're building essentially a virtual or an augmented reality grocery store where you can go through and you have a list, and we can have you, get the corn or whatever is on the shelf, and we can actually monitor your motor performance and your cognitive performance in terms of how well you are performing these two activities. So, this is a project that is, to me, very exciting because we're really taking technology that was initially designed or developed for the big screen. So in 2018, there was a movie called Ready Project One, directed by Steven Spielberg. And you can see it sort of here, where in this movie, the individuals, they could run through these virtual worlds. And what's interesting is they could run through them on this Infinitec treadmill. So normally a treadmill just goes in one direction. But with this treadmill, what we're able to do is you can move in all directions. So you could be walking straight, and then you can make a turn, and you can turn all the way around. So what that allows us to do, and what we're doing, is building grocery store environments, building park environments, all sorts of environments, virtual and augmented reality environments, that we can really test, the technology that's expanding, like in deep brain stimulation, for example. If our ability to assess and evaluate and tune those stimulation parameters isn't keeping up with the technology that you can actually change parameters with, then there's a disconnect. So our goal here is, can we use this technology to arm the people who are doing DBS programming so that they can better understand the patient's function, so that there's a match between the great technology that has gone on and expanded with DBS into now the programming of these systems. So that is some of just, again, a high level recap of the things we're doing. And some of you, hopefully you went to the other kiosk, or maybe if you have an interest, you could sign up for these studies. They're really fun. And again, Ben, thanks a lot for having me today.
Thank you, Jay. Excellent introduction to all the wonderful work that you're doing in just a few minutes. And we've got some good questions coming, so please keep the questions coming. And Dr. Dustin Heldman is now going to talk a little bit about his work at Great Lakes Neurotechnology.
Thank you very much. Yep, my name is Dustin Heldman. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer at Great Lakes Neurotechnologies. We're a small business located here in Cleveland, actually down in Independence, just outside of Cleveland. We've been around as Great Lakes about 10 years, actually started as part of another business in the area called Cleveland Medical Devices. And we make sensors and apps for monitoring Parkinson's disease. So as you likely know, Parkinson's is very complex and symptoms change quite a bit throughout the day. And when you visit your doctor, they may not be getting a clear picture of how you're doing. You may be having a good day or a bad day. It may be a good time or a bad time. And it can be very difficult during this snapshot, during an appointment, which may only happen once or twice a year, for them to get a good idea of how you're actually doing. So we make sensors and apps for monitoring Parkinson's disease symptoms remotely. And the real goal of our technology, what we do, is how do we convert these squiggles on the left, these signals collected from accelerometers and gyroscopes, motion sensors, how do we make them into something clinically meaningful? So that's what we've been doing for a number of years. So we use machine learning algorithms. Machine learning, it's a fancy word for math based on historical data. So we've collected quite a bit of data over the years. Some of you may have even participated in our clinical data collection studies, where we had people with Parkinson's disease wear our sensors on various parts of the body, and we videotaped them while performing a number of tasks and had clinicians score those videos. So using the motion data we extracted some features from that motion data corresponding to some of the technical details about the movements, and compared them with the clinician ratings that they did using the same scales that they would do during an office assessment, and developed these algorithms to take motion data to objectively rate your symptoms. And we've put these into a number of products. They're all in our Kinesia family of products. And these use that data to you evaluate symptoms objectively. So the Kinesia 1 product is a task-based system. So it has our motion sensor there shown on the left and an iPad app for guiding patients through a motor assessment. And this is being used quite a bit as outcome measures in clinical trials. So when drug companies and device companies are developing new therapies, they can use technology such as this to monitor patients, and this can be done in your home to get an objective rating of how you're doing, and this can be used to determine if the drug is effective. Another system we have, Kinesia 360, uses a smartphone app and sensors worn on the wrist and ankle to monitor symptoms during activities of daily living. So with this system, the user puts on the sensors, wears it throughout the day, and our algorithms are able to separate out the symptoms and side effects from medication, so tremor, dyskinesia, things like that, from actual activities of daily living. There's been a lot of talk today, and there will be about therapy known as deep brain stimulation. And people have mentioned how it's really complex to determine the optimal set of stimulation parameters, determine exactly how to set it. There's kind of a trial and error process. So we have a product that can be used to help with this optimization process. So using our sensors to help guide the programming process. And then our final product, and this is the one probably most relevant to many of the people watching here, is the Kinesia U motor assessment system, which instead of using a sensor that we make, this uses a smartwatch and the sensors in it. And this uses smartwatches that are readily available. Most smartwatches now have accelerometers and gyroscopes. So instead of needing to buy a special sensor, we've applied our symptom rating scoring algorithms to work using the sensors in the smartwatch. It is a prescription app. Right now we have it on market for Android, but we are working on an Apple version. I know many people have expressed interest in the chat over in the virtual exhibit hall asking for an Apple version. So that is something we're going to have later this year. But this lets you track your symptoms yourself, so you can see how you're doing throughout the day and across days, so you can objectively see how you're doing over time, and share this information with your doctor so that this can become a part of your therapy. Some of the things that we think that these wearable sensors and this technology is going to be useful for is really going to be part of the overall disease management. So if you can be monitored remotely and your doctor can see how you're doing without having to come to visit, it could save time and get you optimized faster. Also, the data collected can help with the adjustments, and eventually we may be able to build in things like predicting when medication's wearing off before you may even realize it, and figure out ways to alert you that it's time to take the next medication dose. And also, we've done a number of studies showing that when patients track their symptoms and see how they're doing, they're more engaged, they take their medication more regularly, and it helps them feel kind of a sense of empowerment in managing their disease. So that's my last slide, and I hope that we can spur some discussion based on that.
Excellent. Thank you, Dustin. That was a great overview. And I also want to remind everybody, we also have Dr. Richard Ramo here, who's our Senior Functional Neurosurgery Fellow. So let me start with a question for Richard, perhaps, to open up the discussion. And please, while we're talking, please put more questions in the chat. I see we have a bunch already. that we'll go through as well. Dr. Ramo, can you tell us a little bit, if I have Parkinson's, how do I know if I'm a candidate for something like deep brain stimulation?
So that's a wonderful question, Dr. Walter. So, you know, one wonderful thing is if you're with a movement disorder neurologist, that's something that they'll help go through. But there's a couple components to keep in mind for candidacy. First are the symptoms that you have. And for those with Parkinson's disease or people that know about Parkinson's disease, the first thing that usually comes to mind is tremor in the hands specifically. But there can also be slowness or what we call rigidity or stiffness, and then freezing of gait. Now, those are essential things that we use to first know that you have Parkinson's. And the nice thing about our treatment is tremor, rigidity, and slowness are all things that we can do something for. And so once you've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, then in terms of deep brain stimulation or any kind of surgical intervention, you want to make sure that you first maxed out medical therapy. And the reason that's so important is everything has a risk and a benefit, and we don't want to expose anyone to risks of any kind of surgery, even if it's non-invasive, if we can give you a medication to take it with less side effects. So first, we want to make sure that you've been diagnosed appropriately. The second is to make sure that you have taken the appropriate medication and are either having what we call more off time. So you take the medication and it does well for a little bit, but then it starts to wear off faster and faster. Or we have to raise the dose of the medication to the point where you start getting extra movements, what we call dyskinesias. And so both those things kind of say, okay, we've tried all the medical therapy that we can do, and it's time to think about something more.
Very good, thank you. We have a bunch of questions about how do I get involved in research with technology, and I guess I would also point everybody to the chat if you haven't checked it out, because some of the email contacts are there for Amy Jansen and the info at the Great Lakes Neurotechnology.com email address. But Jay and Dustin, in order, I guess, could you give us a little bit of overview on the best way to get engaged in your research?
Yeah, for sure. So Amy or Liz Jansen, she is the primary study coordinator for me, and reaching out to her email is in the chat there. She will, we're looking for patients across the board, right, in terms of very early diagnosed individuals all the way to more advanced individuals to, again, really figure out how we can use technology in service of health. Dr. Ramos talked about deep brain stimulation, and he didn't mention the potential positive effects of DBS on gait and postural stability, because it's really not very well known yet or able to. But I think, and again, this is beyond your question, Ben, but that's an area where using this technology coupled with the new DBS technology really opens up that possibility, I think. So.
And I'll just add, yeah, we are always interested in having people participate in our clinical studies to further develop our technology, as well as focus groups giving us feedback on our products as we develop them and as we improve the products on market. In the chat, you can see info@glneurotech.com if you're interested. But also, I'd encourage everyone, clinicaltrials.gov is a good place to find lots of clinical trials that are actively recruiting. I'm sure there are dozens in the area too to get involved, and they're not all involved just in a number are involved in therapies, but a number of are also involved in technology and device development.
And going beyond the research studies, Dustin, since your company offers a lot of products, what's available for our patients right now, and how accessible is your technology to consumers to get in their hands right now through their doctor? What's the process for that?
Sure. So our devices had first received FDA clearance back in 2007. So we've been on market for about 13 years, but until recently, they've been quite expensive. And for that reason, they've been mostly used for research purposes, for use as measuring outcomes in clinical trials. But just last year, we released the Kinesia U system that uses a smartwatch and smartphone that you may already own. It is still considered a medical device. It does require a prescription. So if you're interested in it, we can give you more information or talk to your doctor about Kinesia U, and they can get you a prescription, and then you can sign up. We have more information on our website, glneurotech.com, or also kinesiau.com. But again, this is something that is a lot more accessible, costs a lot less than the previous systems we've had, where we're using our own hardware as opposed to the consumer grade devices.
Excellent, thank you. That was a wonderful response. Someone had asked a question and said it would be interesting to do a poll of how many people are at this conference, and kind of pointed out how getting around is difficult for people with Parkinson's, and the impact of a virtual conference like this is great. We have some answers to that question. There are over 1,100 registrations for this conference, and we'll have a more accurate number by the end. I know that last I checked, there were close to 1,000 folks that were logged on just before we started speaking in this session. That's 1,000 registrations, though, and I guess the other poll that we did was to see of the people who are watching, how many, or of the connections that were watching, how many people were attending from each computer, and it looks like there's at least an average of 2, which is what I would expect. So you put the math together, we probably have close to 2,000 people participating in this event together today. And I think we're learning a lot, and this is an ongoing process. This is new to us, but it's kind of exciting that we can deliver this kind of program virtually in this day and age. And I think certainly for people who have trouble either because there's no resources where they live or mobility is difficult, we are reaching people from across the country and to some degree the world today. So I thank all of you for engaging and participating in that. I have a question for Dr. Ramo. Can you give us an idea about the difference between DBS and the other technology-focused ultrasound as it pertains to somebody with Parkinson's? Like how do we understand if I'm a patient with Parkinson's, which would be better for me?
Yes, definitely. So just to kind of give us quick description regarding both for those who aren't familiar with them. So for deep brain stimulation, we'd have an electrode that goes into a specific area in the brain. And then it's connected, that electrode is hooked up to a wire that goes to a generator, essentially a very sophisticated battery with a computer in it that goes into the chest. And so the deep brain stimulation doesn't actually cause any lesions or any kind of damage to any tissue, but it uses essentially stimulation or electricity to modulate that area. While high intensity focused ultrasound creates, sometimes we have 1,000 different channels of ultrasound that all converge in a small area, and that creates a lesion. So in deep brain stimulation, you have something going into the brain, but it's not damaging the brain, so to speak, that area that it's going to. Meanwhile, for high intensity focused ultrasound, you don't have anything actually going into the brain, but you are creating a lesion in the brain. Now, the challenge with DBS and the rate limiting factor will be the person's health. And so in regards to deep brain stimulation, you have a couple of risks with anesthesia specifically and the surgery aspect. So anytime you make an incision in in the body, you have a risk for bleeding and infection. And then the anesthesia itself can cause a risk for people who have any issues with their hearts, or if they have any blood thinners that are on. So in that regards, if you are not able to have deep brain stimulation, then high intensity focused ultrasound is a great option. There is a risk of bleeding in HIFU, but it's much, much smaller. And really, the main thing that we would be concerned about is there's a small percentage of people that have balance issues after surgery. Most of the time, this is temporary and it gets better, but that's with high intensity focused ultrasound. So a couple specifics. So there's the areas that we treat with high intensity focused ultrasound will only take care of the tremor symptoms. Meanwhile, with deep brain stimulation, you should be able to attack the tremor, the balance issues, the posture issues, and the slowness and the stiffening. So the deep brain stimulation gives us a lot more options, so to speak, and it doesn't actually damage the brain, as I mentioned. But for those people who can't have DBS, now we have an option. We can actually make a difference in the tremor. And, you know, I've seen people who were unable to hold a cup to be able to eat or drink, or, you know, a cup or a spoon to eat or drink, be able to, for the first time in years, be able to feed themselves. And that's a true, beautiful thing to see.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Dustin, there's a question more about wearable watches, specifically with a telehealth visit. Can you tell us a little bit how those two work together?
Sure. So telehealth refers to typically a live meeting with your doctor, typically on video. So it would be a one-on-one meeting, while we make devices for remote patient monitoring, which aren't necessarily going to be used while you're talking with your doctor live, but rather throughout the day, over time. So one possible use of these kind of devices are, let's say your doctor, or you think you may need to, have your medication adjusted. So it may make sense for you to use a device to monitor your symptoms for a number of days or weeks before talking to your doctor. Then your doctor can see that information, and during a telehealth visit, without you even having to travel for an actual visit, the data can be transferred remotely over the internet. Our devices use cloud-based data storage, and then your doctor can see that. So they could even look at it ahead of time and then talk about the results of what they see during your visits. And then additionally, let's say after your therapy's changed, maybe it's a change in dose or a change in medication schedule or the addition of another type of medication, or even if it's just a lifestyle change, then you can use these to keep monitoring after the fact. And this is something that, your doctor could look at afterwards just to check and see how you're doing, or you can track yourself as well and have some confidence that you're doing okay. So this is information that you can discuss during a telehealth visit, but in actuality, this remote monitoring can continue beyond during the actual one-on-one conversations with your doctor.
Great, thank you for that response. The next question.
Hey, Ben?
Yeah, go ahead.
Add something? Sorry.
Yeah, please.
I think, Dustin gave a great description there. I think, an important part, as you mentioned on the, with the slides, the televisits have increased, et cetera. And, to me, the way I view, Dustin's technology and others like that is it really helps, rather than having this relationship where you might say, well, how are you feeling, or doing things a little bit like that, it allows the patient and the provider to then start speaking the same language. Because, if you have that data that you're collecting and we can see it over time, then it's very clear, oh, it looks like you had increased tremor, or you had some real slowdowns or whatever during this time. Let's think about addressing them. And then those, again, my experience is some of those things are very hard for a patient to recall, especially if there's 6 months or 3 months between different visits. So So yeah, I'm a huge fan and a proponent of using that. I think it's great.
Yeah, I completely agree. From the perspective of our clinical practice, it's always a challenge and something we're always trying to optimize is to understand the difference between what we see in the patient before us at that moment in time and what the sequence of events are through the days and weeks that go between the visits. Because we know that oftentimes people are fairly optimized to the best they can be, a little artificially on the day of their visit with the physician. They have to be able to get up and be mobile and get there. And they're going to pay a lot of attention to their medications so that they can do all the things to be ready and be on time. But that's not kind of a real world situation, and things might be worse in real life. And certainly over time. I mean, that's one of the biggest things. And I would say a lot of physicians that aren't movement disorder specialists may not completely appreciate as much how different life is for somebody with Parkinson's from moment to moment. I think physicians in general think, and maybe people in general think of Parkinson's as one state. This is how things are for you. This is how bad it is. But it's always something that we have to push to educate folks that one moment you could be great and the next it could be awful and back to great again. And it's to understand those dynamics and how frequent it occurs and why it occurs. And that's where this technology to pinpoint those moments in time is really important so that we can change the therapy to match and improve those symptoms. So I think that's a great point that you bring out there, Jay. When we talk about, go ahead, yeah.
And I think the other part that you're alluding to or hitting on is, so I don't know percentage, for instance, patient a movement neurologist percentage. And we sort of forget about that in Northeast Ohio because, we've got people like you and, Hubert and everyone else and others. But, I'm originally from a very small town in Iowa, and everyone in that region, they're managed by a primary care, right? And that person sometimes is seeing a high ankle sprain, they see a Parkinson's patient, they see whoever. And so, again, I think, this remote monitoring and this technology could, I would love it if, we could deploy it to a friend in Iowa and that person could now be your patient, and because they could benefit from your expertise. So,
very good point. I want to take what you just said and kind of back up earlier in the disease state now. What about people who haven't been diagnosed with Parkinson's? Is there anything that you're working on, Dr. Alberts, or your colleagues, as far as technology that would help us understand early Parkinson's or even undiagnosed Parkinson's and be able to make better judgments there?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, this goes to, some of the things that you mentioned around AI and Dustin talked about with machine learning and our ability now to gather so much information from consumer devices that, we have a project going, it's very close to kicking off with, that's being sponsored by both the National Football League as well as the NFLPA, the union. And they're asking us to look at data from all sorts of areas, whether it be a wearable, whether it be devices like your phone or Apple Watch, et cetera. And are there potential sort of biomechanical or other types of movement signatures that preclude the diagnosis of Parkinson's and other neurological diseases? So I think we're trying to, again, leverage as much data as we can to to see any potential subtle changes that could help in the early diagnosis and eventual management as well.
And then you mentioned artificial intelligence and machine learning. Is that something that we can use for your friend in Iowa to get a more elaborate algorithm as far as treatment, potentially to basic general practitioners to help folks where they don't have access to movement disorders neurologists?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of how we could leverage data, right? So if we think about, as you know, there are a number of different, the medication cocktail is very difficult to manage and get right. And if, if one of our goals is to really create a signature, if you will, of motor and cognitive function, and then if with enough data and using machine learning and AI technology, we can say, okay, this patient is, you look like this, whatever that is. And 80% of those patients are responsive to medication A, 20% are not responsive to anything, or, take your pick. Now, using the technology Dustin or others have created, when you're in Iowa, you can say, okay, I look like patient A. So that primary care provider can say, okay, this is probably the path we want to get you on. So hopefully it gets patients on the right medication much faster and provides some good clinical decision support for the primary care providers.
Yeah, so I think that fits into what you do too, Dustin, as far as the technology for sensing and monitoring those kinds of symptoms early on, and then changes. We have these consumer products, the Apple Watch, the Android watches on the other platform that are commercially available. And I know that some of your software approaches fit into those technology platforms by these large consumer companies. Can you give us a sense for, there's questions about affordability of one of these watches, and I guess a little bit of what they do for you with Parkinson's outside of using your apps and technology, and then what it adds to it?
Sure. So following along with that, as more and more people use these, like Jay was saying, we can develop best practices based on this information. As far as affordability, we actually came out with our first version on Android because it is cheaper. You can get an Android watch for about $100. That said, the Apple Watch is much more popular among people that have smartwatches. So right now, it is mostly the early adopters and more tech-savvy people that are interested in this. But as time goes on, and I think we're rapidly approaching it, insurance is more and more likely to cover these type of systems, because in the long run, it will save money if with better diagnosis, better treatments, fewer office visits. Doctors can see more patients in less time. So as soon as there's coverage for these types of technologies, which is slowly coming around, and we believe it will be there soon. It is for some, and actually the COVID pandemic has actually spurred some maybe sped up the pace to getting some of these technologies, these remote patient monitoring systems covered to avoid having people to travel to the clinic. So I think, in the long run, these type of technologies will actually not only improve patients' outcomes and how they're doing, but actually reduce costs by getting a better picture of how patients are doing, and expand access to people who don't, live close to movement disorder specialty centers.
So what kind of costs are we talking about with those platforms?
As far as the what the hardware, what the devices costs, I mean, I mentioned an Android watch. You can get online from a variety of stores for $100 to $200. I think the Apple watches are probably closer to $400. But then again, we're hoping and insurance will cover this eventually. And then as well, so both for patients using it, and then also for doctors in their time, reviewing their data and discussing it with you.
There's another question in the chat from Renee about using these technologies for bradykinesia. So I guess I would ask Jay, maybe in our waiting rooms, can we deploy technology to look at bradykinesia, and would that help our care? And then to Dustin, to kind of re-review as far as what specifically your technologies look at with regards to bradykinesia or slowness of movement in people with Parkinson's disease.
Do you want me to go first?
No,
or
for
Jay,
sure,
Jay,
Ben.
you want to go ahead?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah,
Sorry.
so, for sure, you mentioned the waiting room, and I think that's a great example. I think, as you're well aware of, the Center for Neurological Restoration, we're soon to be, unveiling the waiting room of the future. And the waiting room of the future isn't filled with magazines and that are, 5 months old. It's going to be filled with technology. And with that technology, we can absolutely quantify really the characteristic symptoms of Parkinson's, and including bradykinesia, using some of the technology I showed in the earlier video of the guy walking. So I think that is certainly something that when more and more in-person visits come, folks will start to get experience with and see them.
Thanks for the engaging conversation, everybody, and thank you to the panel. And to the listeners, we have more Q&A for the general session to come, so stay tuned.